Good morning on this Friday morning. This is The Take. I'm Pete Najarian for Market Rebellion. Looking back to yesterday, what a historic day. The numbers that we had to go through from an economic standpoint, absolutely extraordinary. We did shut down. We have opened up. We've had some shutdowns again, some slight shutdowns, or at least some reversing. And that's what we're dealing with. That's what this pandemic is all about. And the fits and starts and looking at the economy, I'll tell you, some of those numbers were unbelievable. And we're looking at a focus on what's going on with the latest ideas for stimulus. Republicans are here, Democrats are there, $1 trillion here, $3 trillion there. I mean, it's unbelievable what we are dealing with right now, and yet the markets just continue to push forward. Now, yesterday in the pre-markets, we were down a couple of hundred points yesterday in the pre-market. Then, very early in the session, we were down. Matter of fact, as we approached the halftime report, we were down 500 plus points. So, significant move to the downside yesterday in terms of the Dow. Now, the interesting thing is finishing up the day down about 200-ish points, maybe 2.25, something like that. But you look over at the NASDAQ, and what a different story that you're seeing there with it was off about 70 points. But despite the fact that the market stayed in negative territory on the Dow Industrial side, you look over at the NASDAQ side and you start to look at a market that not only was in the red, moved into the green, but moved very strongly into the green, finishing up nearly 0.5%, actually about, I guess, 0.4% yesterday. But where was that coming from? Well, the leadership that they were getting from technology, of course, the semiconductors, as well as biotech. And I'll get into that in a little bit more. But what was really weighing on the markets yesterday, because we talk about the markets being down 500 plus points, what was the deal there? Well, it was the financials. They were down about 2% yesterday. Energy, really something that has been a weight on the market of late, and it was down about 4% yesterday. You look over at the XLE. So that was definitely some of the elements that was pulling things down. And as I mentioned, you've had semiconductors. They were positive. You look at the technology stocks. They were positive. Then you look over at biotech. That was a really strong day, up about 1.5% yesterday when you look over at some of the different biotech ETFs. So you've got a volatility in the 24-25 range. We've got volumes that continue to be about 25 million per day. That seems like we've kind of moved closer and closer to those kind of numbers. We were in the 30 plus millions. We started having a couple of very slow days where we were in the low 20 millions. And here we are now, seems like a little bit more consistently about 25 million range. And I'll tell you what, last night, was there anything like last night in terms of that was an earnings palooza. We had all the biggies. Now, the big guys had already been up on the hill, and then we have the earnings the following day. Let's just take a look through what's going on here with the NASDAQ. The NASDAQ in the pre-market, and we were up over 200 points in the pre-market for the NASDAQ. That's a pretty substantial move. Didn't see anything close to that once we started getting closer to the actual opening bell. You open the bell, you take a look at a name like a Facebook, though, up about 7.5%. Apple and Amazon, these are monster companies, up well over 5% apiece. Now, the only lagger as we look through this right now is Google. And Google actually continues to be in the red today. And so not everybody gave everything that they wanted to hear. I think of all of the different earnings reports, and they were all spectacular. Probably Apple would be the most surprising in terms of just the execution and the numbers, absolutely extraordinary. And they just continue to grow in all the right areas as well. So you look at that earnings report, you can understand there's a stock now that's well over $400, and they announced that 4-for-1 split. So a lot of different news for Apple that was very, very positive yesterday. Merck comes out, and their numbers were great. So you look at Merck, and it's trading, it was trading at least north of $81 a share. So we're seeing different little pockets of strength, but overall, there's a main pocket of weakness. So there were only 3 names last I looked over at the Dow that were in positive territory: Apple, Merck, Intel. You got tech, you got obviously healthcare, and then you got a chip. So tech and a chip, definitely. So that stood out. But what was dragging on the markets? Well, I mentioned, and it's not necessarily the price of oil, but you look at the earnings and you look at Exxon, down. You look at Chevron, down. You look at Caterpillar, that's down. And the financials just cannot seem to get themselves to move to the upside and hold on to any gains and build on those gains. I've talked about this time and time again, but JP Morgan has tried to get over 100 and gotten over 100 briefly, only to pull right back. Well, once again, it's now a lot closer to 95 than it is 100, because that's another one of the names that seems to have some definite pressure on it. Now, Take a look at gold, however. Gold with a nice rocket towards that 2,000 number. That did pull back, eased back, I should say, but gold definitely on just an absolute tear. We've talked about the GLD. We've talked about all the different call activity. I mean, it's just been an amazing run for the GLD in 2020. And specifically, if you go back to late April, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. And we have been documenting this the whole way with the unusual options we've seen in the GLD and how they've been rolling out and up and just continue to do this. SLV, same sort of story, same time frame, everything. And the explosive move, because that had been lagging. It had some paper, but it still was lagging, and now we've watched that path move very, very rapidly to the upside of late. Matter of fact, today, SLV trading close to 24. As I mentioned, gold got up near that 2,000 level, then did a little bit of a pullback. You got crude, not doing a whole lot, still above $40. So all of that kind of hanging in there when you look at the commodities front. Volatility, 24.5, somewhere in that sort of range. We've talked about this contraction of movement and the contraction of the movement in terms of the VIX itself, the measurement. So 24.5, you're looking at about a 1.5% move per day. That's the expected move. And we've had a lot of different movements. And if you look at not just the close and opening, that type of thing, but you look what's going on through the day, makes some sense. Yesterday was a great example of that. So the headline absolutely is the big four. Google being the one disappointment. Financials, as I say, a bit of a drag. JP Morgan down about 1.2% today. That's disappointing. Something that's not getting a lot of chatter, but I think it's something worthwhile, and you're going to hear it here on The Take because I have not heard it on financial TV. I've not heard it on the radios, but Japan. Now, there seems to be more issues with Japan of late, and they've talked about, are they having issues with any outbreaks? So that's something interesting. I will tell you this, the EWJ is something worth looking at. That's down about 2% today. So just something just to throw out there that we're not hearing a whole lot of chatter about, but something that's probably worth at least exploring a little bit. And by the way, speaking of exploring, talk about gold being 2,000 or very close to that number. How do you get that gold out? Oh my goodness. I guess you got to use something to get that gold out. You got to get something to go into those mines. You've got to have all those things. Now, Caterpillar, yeah, it's down a little bit today, but on the down shot from earnings, and it's in negative territory, there was some buying, and it was right out of the gate. It was the first thing that hit on the unusual option activity today. This is very early in the day. We're only 45 minutes in, but I'm going to be on the halftime report today. But so we're looking at Caterpillar. Now, there we have a buyer of 3,600 of the August 7 calls. These are August 7th expiring, so 1 week out. Today's July 31st, go out 1 week, August 7th, and the 140 calls trading between 20 cents and about 74 cents. So interesting to see this, a nice, decent sized buyer just going a 1 week out, that theme of very short term, this playing in once again. Stock was trading about 133, so they're looking for a pretty decent move in a very short period of time for Caterpillar to actually recover some of the negative that they're seeing today and maybe get up and start to move to the upside. Again, remember, if you have the knowledge, that is king. And part of the knowledge is those options don't necessarily have to go in the money to perform. They can perform if the stock's going to make a pretty violent move to the upside without even having to get to 140. Those options can start to move very rapidly as well. So something to keep an eye on. So we talk about this all the time. This is The Take. I talk about it. These shirts, hats, and all this stuff that I've got, it's great. We got a wonderful guy who's a partnership over at the Minnesotan. That's the Minnesotan.com. These guys do a great job. They've got a lot of the great merchandise over there. They've got The Take, they've got Giddy Up, they've got Bull, they've got it all. They've got golf shirts, they got hats, all that kind of stuff. The great thing about it is this gentleman is nice enough to actually donate a portion of those sales to Twin Cities Lyme to help fight Lyme disease, which is something my wife and I are very passionate about. She has Lyme disease. It's something we're just trying to get people educated and trying to get them to a Lyme literate doctor so they can get the proper diagnosis. That's the whole goal. And these wonderful people over there at the Minnesotan, very helpful with that as well. So you see these shirts, love them, absolutely the greatest. Folks, have a great day of trading. We'll see you next week on Monday.